The story of Juliana Redding is one that still haunts those who followed the case closely, especially since the odds of ever getting real closure feel incredibly slim. Countless young dreamers flock to Los Angeles, all hoping to make their mark in the cutthroat world of entertainment. And while some of them actually manage to build successful, fulfilling careers, many others either head home defeated or get stuck chasing that one elusive break. One of these hopefuls was a 21-year-old aspiring actress named Juliana Redding, who had moved from Arizona to Santa Monica back in 2005. But her journey would take a series of shocking turns, ultimately ending in unimaginable tragedy. The final outcome of her case left many wondering if real justice was ever truly served. To this day, Juliana's family is still grappling with the agonizing fact that the person behind her brutal murder might never be fully held accountable for their actions. Let's take a closer look at the case. From everything we know, Juliana Redding had a happy, fulfilling childhood in Tucson, Arizona, where she was a student at Salpointe Catholic High School. After graduation, she made the big move to California to chase her dream of modeling, while still staying close enough to her family. Juliana had once shared with her parents, Patricia and Greg, that she dreamed of opening her own boutique one day, but her biggest dream was always to build and run a business of her own. Even after moving out to Los Angeles, Juliana stayed incredibly close with her family. She would call her parents all the time to update them on her life and what she was planning for the future. They were constantly exchanging text messages, and she would come back to Tucson for visits whenever she could. By 2008, Juliana was taking classes at Santa Monica College and living on her own in a cozy bungalow right there in Santa Monica, all while chasing down modeling and acting gigs. To make ends meet, Juliana also worked as a waitress. At the time, she seemed to be happy with where her life was headed, but everything changed in the most tragic way on March 16th of that year. The nightmare began when her mother, Patricia, started to worry when she couldn't get a hold of her daughter. Here's what we know. On March 15th, Juliana spent the day playing a round of golf before heading back to her bungalow. She settled in for the evening, planning to just watch some TV, mostly kicking back with some Seinfeld reruns. But the following evening, Patricia got a concerned call from Juliana's neighbors. They reported that they hadn't seen her at all that day, and her dog was still cooped up inside the bungalow. The house itself, they said, was unnervingly quiet and seemed deserted. A sense of dread started to creep in for Patricia, who began calling Juliana's phone over and over again, desperately hoping to hear her voice. But every call went unanswered, and Juliana never returned her mother's calls. At first, Patricia tried to convince herself that Juliana was just tied up and would get back to her. But as 6 p.m. rolled around with still no word, her mother's intuition told her something was terribly wrong. That's when she made the decision to call the police and request a welfare check, laying out all the troubling details of the situation. When officers arrived on the scene at Juliana's bungalow, they began by surveying the exterior. At first glance, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Her car was parked right in the driveway, which suggested she should have been home. But once officers made entry, they were met with an absolute silence. No sounds, no signs of life. It didn't take long for them to realize something was dangerously wrong. The air was thick with the smell of natural gas. Adding to the alarm, they spotted a single candle, still burning, near the front door. As they pushed deeper into the home, they traced the source of the gas to the kitchen stove, and it quickly became clear. This was no accident. The gas had been turned on, intentionally. Crucially, however, the burner itself was unlit, effectively turning the entire bungalow into a ticking time bomb. But that wasn't the most horrifying discovery the officers would make that night. While clearing the rest of the house, they entered a bedroom in the back of the bungalow, and that's where they found Juliana. Tragically, it was too late. She was already gone, and investigators could see right away that the cause of death was strangulation. The crime scene also told a clear story. She had put up a fight for her life. The entire apartment was in disarray, showing evidence of a violent struggle. Forensic analysis later confirmed the presence of Juliana's own DNA under her fingernails, a telltale sign that she had clawed at her own neck, desperately trying to free herself. Although there were very few clues pointing to a suspect, one piece of evidence was impossible to ignore. The intruder had purposefully turned on the gas, a clear attempt to cause an explosion that would wipe out all evidence of the crime. If the assailant's plan had succeeded, the majority of the forensic evidence at the scene would have been completely obliterated. The setup was obvious. Gas from the stove was intended to ignite from a candle left burning nearby, triggering a massive blast. Luckily for the investigation, the bungalow's older design worked in their favor. The building wasn't airtight enough for the gas to reach an explosive concentration. From there, investigators started to piece together a timeline of Juliana's last moments alive. Their timeline began on the night of March 15th, at approximately 10 p.m., when an unknown person forced entry into Juliana's home and immediately launched an attack. During the assault, her head was slammed against the floor, inflicting a severe injury. The length and ferocity of the fight led detectives to a key theory. They believed the attacker was likely surprised by how fiercely Juliana fought back, which caused him to escalate the violence and ultimately strangle her to death. A review of phone records later uncovered a tragic detail. Juliana had tried to call 911, but the call never connected. It was a gut-wrenching discovery, proof she was trying to get help. Meanwhile, the neighbors who called Patricia told police they hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary, either inside or outside the bungalow. However, they did remember hearing the sound of furniture being moved and a person shouting at around 9:53 the previous night. Tragically, they didn't think it was anything serious at the time. They later explained that nothing about the noise seemed particularly alarming. In their minds, it could have just been a small get-together or a simple disagreement. Back at the scene, crime scene technicians carefully collected several key pieces of forensic evidence, which included numerous DNA samples recovered from Juliana's clothing, as well as from her throat, her cell phone, and the front door. The lab would need some time to process the samples and hopefully identify anyone who had been inside her home. While waiting for the lab results, detectives started questioning Juliana's friends and family. They were trying to build a clearer picture of her life, looking for any connections that could lead them to a suspect. It was Juliana's father who pointed investigators toward a man named John Gilmore, a man Juliana had been seeing on and off. He told detectives he'd always been worried about his daughter's relationship with Gilmore, describing the man as having a violent temper, and as it turned out, his fears were completely justified. Gilmore had previously kicked in the door of Juliana's car, and had even forced his way into her home during an argument. This information was exactly the kind of break investigators were looking for. They immediately launched a search for John Gilmore, and it wasn't long before they tracked him down. In the interrogation room, Gilmore admitted he went to Juliana's house on Sunday morning, but he claimed that even though her car was in the driveway, she never came to the door. He insisted to investigators that he didn't smell any gas, but said that when he peeked through the security gate, he could see a candle burning inside. Gilmore also admitted that he and Juliana had their share of arguments, and when detectives pressed him about the violent incidents her family described, he acknowledged they'd had major blow-ups on several occasions. One of those arguments, he said, had happened just that Saturday night. Gilmore claimed the trouble started when he called Juliana to let her know he was going out with friends for the evening. He said she got upset and hung up on him, then decided to go out with one of her own friends. Meanwhile, Gilmore went to a house party just a few miles from her apartment. The couple kept texting back and forth for the rest of the night, but their messages were still tense from the earlier argument. At around 10 p.m., Juliana suddenly went silent. The following morning, after still not hearing from her, Gilmore tried calling and sending more texts, but got no response. That's when he says he got worried and decided to drive over to her bungalow, but claims he couldn't find her anywhere. He eventually left, and at first, investigators zeroed in on Gilmore as the prime suspect. However, security footage from the night of the murder quickly cleared his name. Surveillance cameras placed him at a Jack-in-the-Box and a nearby convenience store between 9:45 and 10:15 that night. On top of that, several people from the house party confirmed he was there right when the attack was happening, which effectively gave him a solid alibi. ruling him out as the killer. Then, a major break in the case came when forensic tests revealed that most of the DNA in Juliana's apartment belonged to a woman, not a man. This not only completely ruled out Gilmore's involvement, but also left investigators with more questions than answers. So, they shifted their focus, interviewing every woman in Juliana's social circle. They started digging into rumors of a potential love triangle or intense jealousy, considering the possibility of someone who was envious of her looks, her success, or her glamorous lifestyle. But even after collecting DNA samples from everyone they questioned, not a single one matched the evidence found at the crime scene. It was then that another man's name surfaced in the investigation, a doctor by the name of Munir. The investigation soon revealed that Juliana and Munir had first crossed paths back in 2007 when she was working at a restaurant, giving detectives a brand new lead to follow. It was clear that Juliana had made a very strong impression on Munir because he quickly offered her a job as his medical assistant. An offer she accepted. She was likely drawn to the opportunity for better pay. After all, working as a restaurant hostess or server wasn't exactly a high-paying gig, especially with the constant stress of dealing with demanding customers. However, their relationship soon became much more than just professional. Before long, Juliana agreed to move in with Munir, and for a time, he supported her completely, letting her live in his lavish Beverly Hills home. In the beginning, the arrangement must have seemed both exciting and flattering, but it wasn't long before Juliana started to feel uneasy about Munir's behavior. She started to sense that he was becoming more and more possessive, and maybe even obsessed with her. At one point, Munir actually proposed to Juliana, and even promised to buy her a luxury car for her 21st birthday. As a wealthy man, he definitely had the money to take care of her, but what started out as generosity soon began to feel deeply unsettling. Juliana was starting to feel deeply uncomfortable, especially given Munir's reputation for lavishing women with expensive gifts like cars and jewelry. It's hard to say if Munir was exaggerating their relationship out of obsession or if he had simply misread Juliana's intentions. In any case, his behavior grew increasingly erratic, and Juliana quickly realized she needed to put some distance between them. Determined to take back control of her life, she made the decision to end things with him for good. She finally moved out on her own, settling into a Santa Monica bungalow her father helped her pay for, hoping to make a fresh start. Strangely enough, Juliana and Munir kept in touch after the breakup, which by all accounts had been on good terms. One of Juliana's friends later revealed that the two of them, along with the friend herself, had once gone on a trip to Las Vegas to celebrate a friend's birthday. But the situation wasn't nearly as simple as it looked. When Juliana's father decided to do some digging into Munir's background, he uncovered something profoundly unsettling. Munir was not only married, but he also had 3 children living back in Lebanon. When he broke the news of his findings to Juliana, he was certain Munir's family was completely in the dark about her and his other affairs. The revelation left Juliana utterly shocked and heartbroken. She told her father right then and there that she was completely done with Munir. Cutting him off entirely and telling him to never contact her again was undoubtedly the right call, despite all the bad blood between them. Juliana's father, Greg, a pharmacist by trade, actually continued to stay in touch with Munir. The two had been collaborating on a business deal, but that deal ultimately fell through when Greg began to suspect that Mooney was running his operations in a shady and possibly illegal way. It became crystal clear that Munir was not the upstanding professional he pretended to be. Detectives found it impossible to overlook the disturbing timing of Juliana's death, happening only 1 week after the business deal went south. This timeline immediately raised red flags, leading them to believe Munir was hiding a lot more than he claimed. The problem was, his DNA was nowhere to be found at the scene of the crime, and to complicate matters, he had already flown out of the country. This made it impossible for the police to bring him in for immediate questioning. In the interim, they shifted focus to conducting a thorough background investigation on him, and what they uncovered would only deepen their suspicions. Investigators started scrutinizing the women who had been previously associated with Munir in a professional capacity. His history with them was, by all accounts, highly questionable. Although they lacked any hard evidence to support the theory, detectives had a strong hunch that the unknown female DNA from the crime scene was somehow linked back to him. Most of Munir's previous female colleagues had either severed all contact with him or were completely unaware of Juliana's existence. But the investigation took a sharp turn when police uncovered his past dealings with a 47-year-old woman named Kelly Supak. In a span of just 18 months, Munir had wired over $1 million to Pak in a series of substantial payments. She was a former real estate broker who had been deeply involved in many of his business enterprises. While investigators couldn't yet prove she played any part in Juliana's murder, they made the decision to place Pak under constant surveillance. Their goal was to covertly obtain a DNA sample without tipping her off. It was a strategic move that would soon become the linchpin of the entire case. The investigators understood they had to tread very lightly if Kelly Supak was indeed involved in the crime. Spooking her could mean she'd alert Munir, who was still out of reach. Therefore, they committed to collecting her DNA through clandestine means. Their patience was finally rewarded when they managed to recover a cigarette she had discarded. The sample was immediately bagged and sent to the forensics lab for analysis. The results that came back were a game-changer. Pak's DNA was a direct match to the samples recovered all over Juliana's bungalow. This was definitive proof that she had been present when the attack took place. And even though Munir still hadn't returned to the United States, this new evidence strongly implicated him in some way. Pak was swiftly taken into custody and charged with Juliana's murder. Meanwhile, Munir had completely vanished without a trace, reportedly bolting just days after he learned of her arrest. Investigators were convinced he had likely fled to Lebanon to evade capture. Still, one major question loomed over the entire case. What was the motive behind Juliana's brutal killing? Detectives theorized that Munir had paid Kelly Supak to go after Juliana in an act of revenge, either out of anger over their breakup or because his failed business deal with Greg had ruined his reputation. One leading theory suggested that Mooney sent Pak to confront Juliana and intimidate her, hoping it would pressure Greg into reconsidering their business arrangement. While this remains pure speculation, police believe the situation took a deadly turn when Juliana fought back, sparking a violent struggle that ultimately ended her life. When the case went to trial, it was alleged that Mooney had agreed to pay Pak a six-figure sum to see his plan through. This theory gained more weight after the Los Angeles Times revealed that Pak had a known history of intimidating people who had crossed Mooney, making it all the more plausible that she was his muscle in this tragic scheme. Pak had allegedly been Mooney's go-to for intimidation in the past, reportedly threatening one of his clients who didn't make their payments, and on another occasion, she supposedly menaced a bank manager who had killed a business deal with him. When charged with second-degree murder, Pak pleaded not guilty, despite the mountain of evidence recovered from Juliana's bungalow, including the DNA proof that placed her squarely at the scene. Her defense team argued that Munir, who was still out of the country at the time, was the only thing connecting the two women, and they claimed the two had never actually met face-to-face. The prosecution's game plan was to argue that Pak had been acting as Muir's enforcer, and that her attempt to intimidate Juliana had spiraled out of control and into murder. However, this entire strategy completely unraveled in court. The judge ruled that prosecutors couldn't introduce the theory, as there simply wasn't enough hard evidence to back it up. Because of this, the state was forced to rely entirely on the physical evidence found at the scene, especially the DNA that tied Pak to the crime. The prosecution painted a vivid picture of Pak as a tall, physically imposing woman, standing nearly 6 feet tall, and she carried herself with the confidence and authority of an enforcer acting on Munir's orders. Her very presence was said to be intimidating, with a commanding personality that few would dare to challenge. As more evidence came to light, a conviction for Juliana's murder seemed all but certain. Pak's DNA was discovered in multiple locations throughout the bungalow. On Juliana's clothing, the front door, the locks, her cell phone, and in the most incriminating discovery of all, on Juliana's throat. Investigators also uncovered her fingerprint and a drop of her blood on a dish in the kitchen sink. The prosecution contended this was undeniable proof she was inside the apartment that night, and since the two women had never met, Pack had no legitimate reason to be there except to carry out an attack ordered by Moynier. Prosecutors argued it was indisputable that Juliana had been strangled by hand, pointing to Pack's DNA on her throat as concrete proof of her involvement. But holding Pack accountable would prove to be a far greater challenge. Just as she had allegedly fought fiercely on the night she encountered Juliana, she wasn't about to go down without a fight in court. Her defense team came prepared to challenge every single piece of evidence, using every legal strategy available to cast doubt on the prosecution's case. One alternative theory from Pack's defense questioned whether she had ever been inside Juliana's bungalow on the night of the murder. They argued the lack of eyewitnesses left far too much uncertainty about what truly transpired. The defense also introduced the possibility of secondary DNA transfer, claiming Pack's DNA might have appeared at the crime scene through indirect contact, perhaps via an object she had touched, which was later brought into Juliana's home. It was a bold argument, but it was one specifically designed to plant reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors. The defense elaborated on this theory by explaining how DNA can transfer when two different people handle the same object, meaning one person's genetic material can be unknowingly passed to another. In simpler terms, they argued the real killer might have inadvertently brought Pack's DNA to the crime scene by touching something she had previously handled. They pointed to a specific example to illustrate this: a towel Pack may have used months earlier during a visit to Mounir's Beverly Hills home. According to the defense's scenario, the murderer could have later used that same towel to wipe away fingerprints or evidence after the attack, unintentionally transferring Pack's DNA to the bungalow. They also argued that since Pack was a regular guest at Mounir's home, and given that Juliana had previously lived in the same house, it was completely plausible her DNA was transferred indirectly, not from a direct struggle during the attack. As for Mounir's supposed involvement in the crime, the defense contended that neither his breakup with Juliana's father nor a soured business deal was a strong enough motive to kill. It also came to light that Pack and Mooney had a professional history together. The sentiment in the halls was that Pack knew she was guilty. The prosecution, however, painted a much darker picture. They alleged that Mounir once boasted about hiring a woman he described as a female James Bond, implying she was a hired gun for secret and possibly deadly missions. Prosecutors argued that Mounir had every reason and all the resources needed to order a hit on Juliana. As the trial wore on, the case took a series of bizarre and nearly unbelievable twists. According to a report from the LA Times, phone records showed that Pack had called Juliana's job and was spotted outside her bungalow the night before she was attacked. Given that the two women had never even met, investigators concluded Pack was trying to figure out Juliana's schedule and how to get into her apartment, all as part of planning the assault. On top of that, both Pack and Mooney were being investigated for their supposed role in a health insurance fraud scheme, an investigation that was still active when the jury came back with a verdict in Pack's favor. The verdict sent a shockwave through the courtroom. The trial had dragged on all the way until 2013, which was an exceptionally long time for a case like this. But when it was all said and done, Kelly Suplag was found not guilty and walked free from the courthouse. Juliana's friends and family were furious, erupting in anger, screaming that Pack absolutely knew she was guilty, and that there had been a terrible miscarriage of justice. Ultimately, no one was ever held responsible for Juliana's murder, and the one man linking all the key players was never even questioned, for one simple reason: he had vanished into thin air. The verdict left Juliana's family utterly heartbroken, and understandably, they were completely devastated. They released a formal statement, expressing their profound sorrow and frustration with the lack of justice. To make an already terrible situation even worse, Mounir's home country of Lebanon has no extradition treaty with the United States and is notorious for shielding its citizens from foreign prosecution. This meant that as long as Mounir stayed there, he would never face consequences for his alleged role in the crime. Her family struggled to understand how such a mountain of evidence against both Pack and Mooney failed to result in a conviction. Over time, they've tried to come to terms with the court's final decision. For instance, Juliana's mother, Patricia, now spends her days painting inside her daughter's room, a quiet ritual that helps her feel some small, lingering connection to Juliana. Even after all these years, Patricia says that painting has become her way of coping, an emotional outlet that allows her to create her most powerful work when she's feeling her most vulnerable. At times, she feels as though Greg, and their son Patrick are still trapped in 2008, the year of the attack. Unable to truly move forward, they are still haunted by the reality that Pac and Mooney walked free. Still, Patricia has managed to find a new sense of purpose through her art and her journey of recovery from breast cancer. She's learned to search for light in even the darkest of moments. As for Munir, it's believed he reunited with his family in Lebanon. And to this day, he continues to maintain his innocence. He has never been officially questioned or formally charged in connection with Juliana's case. In 2015, he was arrested in Germany on accusations of medical fraud, but that case ultimately went nowhere. Authorities allege that he allowed a physician's assistant, someone with no formal medical training whatsoever, to perform surgeries he had personally promised to handle. More than 20 of his patients eventually came forward, claiming the procedures had left them permanently disfigured. For reasons that still remain a mystery, he was set free and returned to Lebanon, where he's once again under suspicion for medical fraud. When investigators tied Pac to the 2015 German case, she was also taken into custody. She was facing charges of conspiracy and misleading patients, carrying out bungled procedures that resulted in severe disfigurement, and scamming insurance companies out of a staggering $150 million. But after posting a $1.5 million bond, she managed to slip through the grasp of the authorities once more. There's no easy answer or satisfying conclusion to Juliana's ordeal. Once it became obvious that Munir had been leading a double life, her family did everything in their power to protect her. And yet, he ultimately walked away without facing any genuine consequences. Some might call this case unsolved, but deep down, everyone knows the real story. Regardless of all the solid evidence presented, sometimes the justice system just plain fails. People put their faith in the due process of law, believing it will stop these failures from happening again. But far too often, it doesn't. The best we can hope for is that Juliana's case serves as a cautionary tale for the future. If you found this case as compelling as we did, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We drop new videos on criminal cases every single night. Until next time, stay aware and stay safe out there.